12 years living himself, contrary to what we are told in school, now that they're finally including Jack in school. He was from Lowell, Mass., and we have Reverend Steve Eddington's going to be on and some other people as well. We have an amazing group of people that we're celebrating. Our producer, Pamela Dickerson, is the one who thought of this program and created it. And Anthony Demarbiex is the glue that holds it together, an actor, singer, performer, musician himself, who's also a technical wizard and somehow manages to keep us from the jaws of disaster. Mr. Jim Canary, who's been a guest every week, who's the keeper of Jack Kerouac's original scroll for On the Road, and the wonderful visual artist Norton Wisdom, our very, very special guest, poet, old friend, concert promoter, recording artist, publisher of over 30 books, one of the amazing people in American life, and someone who has done so much not only for Jack Kerouac and the great fellow Louisvillian, that's the way they pronounce Louisville, in Louisville, Ron Whitehead, who was Dr. Hunter Thompson's friend and great supporter while he was with us. And we have a very special guest, friend of Pamela's, who's a remarkable reader, and we hope she can be here to read some of Satori in Paris. And Pamela, could you pronounce her name correctly so that we say, I want to say it right.
Yes, Chloe Trujillo.
The last name, Chloe?
Chloe Trujillo.
Trujillo. That's what I thought.
Yes, she has a
Okay.
Mexican husband, and she's a
wanted to-
French-German girl.
I just wanted to pronounce it correctly because no one could spell Jack's name while he was alive. And Kerouac was actually originally Kerouac, spelled with an I. And my name is mispronounced so often, I try to get everyone else's right. Last week, we read a part of the book where we ended up talking about what we did in Florida at the wonderful Kerouac Writers Residence, which just started out. And this week, we're going to do something that took place in Louisville, Kentucky. For those of you not familiar with American geography, there is life south of New Jersey and east of Los Angeles, and it's known as the Southland. And Louisville is one of the extraordinary places that has been a culture center. And Ron Whitehead not only is a poet, distinguished poet of Kentucky, but also someone who created a whole new community sense, not only of Jack Kerouac's writing, but of literature in general. He's going to be our special guest on the second half and talk about that. So I'm going to read the last paragraph of where we were when we just left Orlando, another place in the South where we were able to begin what's now a wonderful writer's residence, with the hopes all of you, wherever you are, can do the same thing where you live, not only to honor Jack, but to honor people of distinction in your community. Now, many people who have seen the success of what happened in Orlando at the writer's residence are trying to encourage other communities around the country to honor their own artists. The Kerouac Writers Residence was created to honor the lasting values and creation of new works like Walt Whitman and the Indian legend Kokopelli. Jack and his legacy were about spreading energy and opportunity for others. The seeds that had been sown nearly a half a century ago earlier were bearing fruit. And that's where we left off last week. And now, to prove my scholarly intentions, if I can find them, I'm going to put on my reading glasses as befits a 90-year-old. I never wore them till a year ago, but it is helpful to be able to read. And in my frantic desire to get online, I can't remember where they be. So you'll have to part. Oh, here we are, right in front of me. Great. This is a chapter The book is called Offbeat Collaborating with Kerouac, and this is the second half of the book after Jack died, when we continued his legacy of collaboration and fostering creativity in others. This is called Chapter 17, for those who have the book, page 220, A Down Home Louisville Insomniacathon. Flying from New York to Louisville in February of 2001 for a 48-hour insomniacathon, it was produced by the poet extraordinaire, teacher, and keeper of the Jack Kerouac spirit flame, Ron Whitehead. I sat across the table from a young rapper. "You a writer?" he asked. "Kind of," I said. "I'm a composer, musician, conductor, and I'm writing a second book and a short stanza to start off a 12-bar blues at a 3-day festival I'm going to. After I more or less stick to the first few lines, I'll just take off and see what happens. Like a guy walking on a tightrope or a high wire act, or falling off an ocean liner all alone at midnight in the Caribbean and having to sink or swim." "You mean you freestyle?" he asked, leaning over. "No, I wouldn't disrespect the hip-hop tradition by calling it that. I hear and feel a different style I've been doing for the past 50 years, since I was 18 and started scatting spontaneous poems for fun. We called that scat." "I'll check you out," he said, reaching in the small duffel bag he had stored at the foot of the plane seat in front of him. "Take some of my merchandise. Here's a CD of my music and a T-shirt." "Well, let me look in my bag," I said. I searched through my Mexican shopping bag and came across the photocopy of the old flyer of Jack Kerouac and myself with poets Howard Hart and Philip Lamantia from our 1957 jazz poetry collaboration at Circle in the Square Theater. On the back of the flyer was an old photo of Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, and myself, and an article in the London Times from 1994. I handed it to him. He read the article, turned over the pages, and stared at the flyer. "You got some illustrious past," he said, smiling. "Kerouac, he was saying something they didn't want to hear back then. I loved that book, Tristessa, and the Subterraneans. He must have been one of the first white dudes that wasn't afraid of black people." "He wasn't afraid of anybody," I said. "His mind didn't work that way. He was checking out the world and all its people, and always searching for the beauty." "I liked On the Road too," he said. "All that was in my father's time. My pops used to talk about Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker and Thelonious Monk. One of my brothers won an all-state award as a trombone player, and my other brother plays saxophone, and he talked about those guys. But I was never interested enough to check them out until I read about them in On the Road. He made me feel I was part of that. I went out and bought their music and checked them out. Those guys were bad. Hearing them made me feel closer to my father. He's a little younger than you. I like the way Kerouac lets it all out and speaks his mind. He's telling his truth. That's what I like to do when I rap." We talked for a while about all the different ways poetry and music could complement one another, and we exchanged numbers. "I'll see you in Chicago next month when you're playing the Waltz 3 benefit concert for the homeless," he said. "I got some friends who are playing that show too. I'd like to come back and check you all out." "I'll get you a ticket," I said. "I'll be there. Don't forget me to send me a tape of your daughter singing and doing the readings," he said. "I won't forget. Give your 3-year-old a hug." I walked to the Louisville Airport baggage claim and met Ron Whitehead. The last time we'd been in Louisville together was when Hunter Thompson and Johnny Depp, both Kentucky natives, came to have Hunter honored in his hometown. Ron had organized an amazing event when I did a version of my old Kentucky home with Warren Zevon playing the piano with a Kentucky bluegrass band with Johnny Depp playing slide guitar. Since I'd never met any of the people for this event before, since they were all arriving at different times, I had to rehearse for a few minutes with each of them and then explain how I would cue them in when to play. It all worked like magic, and I used my conducting and composing skills to organize it so it sounded as though we had rehearsed for months. After the concert, Hunter ambled backstage and gave me a hug. "It's been too long a time, Amram," he said. We used to live a half a mile apart up in the hills of Huguenot, New York. Hunter had a cabin, and I had a small farmhouse in the woods off of a dirt road. We both went to the same tiny general store off Route 209, where the owner confided in us that he had seen flying saucers and saucer people, and they were making a landing in the field across the road from his store. He said we were the only ones he could ever trust to us about it because he thought otherwise, since we were weirdos and would understand, no one else would. This was in the middle of the 1960s when Hunter worked for the newspaper, the Middletown Record, before he lost his job for attacking a soda and vending machine in one of his mischievous musical manic moments. I hadn't seen him since then. "I wish Jack were here," he said. "I know how you guys pioneered all that music poetry stuff. It must seem natural when you do it. You know what's appropriate." "I just try to listen," I said. "That's all you have to do. If you listen, you can't go wrong." That's what Jack did all his life. He was a great listener. "Well, this Rhinehead is a great listener too," said Hunter. "He's really crazy. I love him. He's totally out of his mind. He can understand what I'm saying." "Ron does know how to listen," I said, "with his heart as well as his head. He doesn't let his education ruin his natural creativity." Now I was in Louisville with Ron again at a 48-hour insomniacathon with 100 writers and 100 musicians. In addition to performing my own music and demonstrating instruments and rhythms from around the world and reading excerpts from my book, I was going to accompany an army of young poets and musicians in the same way I had accompanied Jack, Lord Buckley, and so many others so long ago. Ron was waiting for me at the baggage claim. "Welcome back to Louisville," he said. "Glad I made it here again, Ron." In the spirit of Jack, "I'm ready to wail," I said. "Do I have time to get a falafel before I accompany an army of underground Kentucky genius poets and musicians?" "I don't know about falafels," said Ron, "but you got everybody's heart." "Well, then we'll eat some grits and collard greens when the sun comes up," I said. "Let's go over to the festival." The Insomniacathon 201 in Louisville was more than a deja vu celebration. Refreshingly absent were people dressed in berets, dark glasses, paste-on goatees, speaking in monosyllabic bad imitations of a big city street hustler or a suburban white drug salesman, like "Duh, dig it, man, right, like a duh." Louisville, the home of Muhammad Ali and Pee Wee Reese, as well as Hunter S. Thompson, was a community with a sense of self. In my first session, about 30 minutes after the plane landed, I told a bunch of young people of high school age that Jack had loved Southern culture and that he had identified the influences of the King James Bible's flowing rhythms of speech and Shakespeare's stately, poetic, dramatic monologues on the writers of New England and the South. Both New England and the South shared a reverence for tradition. Both have a history of pride in that heritage. I told the kids that when I was invited to address the English Speakers Union, when I was a visiting composer at Washington and Lee University in Virginia, I talked about Jack and explained how classic French poetry and prose complemented the primal rhythms of Shakespeare and the Bible, and how that had influenced his work. At the end of my rap for these people, my own age, almost all of them came up and spoke to me. To my delight, they felt that Jack was sadly underrated as a stylistic innovator of 20th century letters. You mean those old dudes were Kerouac groupies? Said one of the young women, about 20 years old. Not groupies, I said. They were people who prided themselves on their knowledge of the English language and wanted to see Jack credited for changing what a novelist can or cannot do. You mean they could understand what he was writing about, even though it must have been so shocking for a bunch of stuffed shirts like that in their tuxedos and evening gowns? No, I said. Each shirt is also stuffed with a heart and soul. Jack saw that he was dealing with human condition. He saw beyond what Henry Miller, one of his supporters, referred to as the air-conditioned nightmare. I talked to them about how Jack saw the past negativity to see the beauty of every experience. All the people there that night at the Insomniac-a-thon and this evening in Virginia were old enough to have lived through the times that Jack wrote about. They all seemed to feel that he was one of the great reporters of our era. I was told by one of the professors at Washington and Lee that most of the members of the English Speakers Union were from distinguished Virginia families who had been here before the American Revolution. As I looked out at the people I was speaking to, I was sure a lot of what Jack wrote about was unfamiliar territory for many of them. And yet, like all gifted authors, his writing made you part of the scenes he described. And I felt the people warm up as I spoke of some of our adventures playing together. I know Jack would have basked in the glow of all that southern warmth that made the room feel like an incarnation of a more gentle time when people showed off the brilliance of their intellect rather than the sparkle of their jewelry. People came up smiling and talking as if they'd spent a whole night in Greenwich Village hanging out with us, I said. Many of them said they'd read Jack and were fascinated, touched by all the places he'd been and all the wild scenes he always seemed to become involved in. Wow, she said, smiling. I can see you guys were on the fringes, way ahead of your time. No, no, we were right on time. We were of the time. We were dealing with what there was at the moment, just like I'm dealing with you here right now, trying to pay attention, trying to be respectful of you and where you're coming from, trying to hear and bear witness to an era that's still misunderstood by many. Wow, she said. You mean you beatniks were historians? First of all, ma'am, none of us were beatniks. That word didn't enter the picture until later when Herb Caen, the columnist from the San Francisco Chronicle, wrote that the Russians had their Sputniks, but we had our beatniks. The phrase caught on and became a stereotype to dismiss us all as a bunch of ignorant, America-hating, sociopathic, untalented mediocrities. Just like most people up north call us rednecks. Even if we got a PhD or become president of the United States, she said. Exactly, I said. The beatnik myth has no more to do with the writing of Jack Kerouac, the music of Charlie Parker, Thelonious Monk, or Dizzy Gillespie, or the paintings of Joan Mitchell and Franz Klein than the Beverly Hillbillies and Hee Haw has to do with the great Southern writers like Carson McCullers, Thomas Wolfe, William Styron, William Faulkner, Willie Morris, Tennessee Williams, Truman Capote, and Terry Southern. So Jack Was a New York snob? She asked, looking somewhat relieved. He was brutalized by the snobbery of New York in the 1950s, I said. Well, she said, they never tell us any of this stuff in English class at college. They will, I said. The remaining primary sources are being interviewed extensively, and with the internet, more information is readily available than ever before. That includes information about us. Your whole generation, born in the 1980s, has it available for the first time. Jack Kerouac's books were never promoted during his lifetime after the road, after On the Road came out. Most people of my age still never regarded him that highly. That's because they still believe what they read about him a long time ago and about the beat scene. They believe what was written about him by others. Those early savage criticisms were written by people who felt a successful man of letters should write and act in a certain prescribed way. They were horrified by Jack's natural down-home, inclusive, friendly, and good-natured, boisterous style because none of them had led sheltered and often uneventful lives, or most of them had. They had no idea what Jack was writing about or why he would possibly write about what they were trained to think were the drugs, dregs, drags of society. All that's changed. Jack's books now sell themselves. Charlie Parker's music sells itself. Doug Brinkley, the head of the Eisenhower Center for American Studies down in New Orleans, told me recently that each generation rediscovers Kerouac on its own terms. I'm here to support you in also rediscovering your own natural born creativity and encourage you to get your friends to read books, look at paintings, go to concerts, enjoy dance programs, attend film festivals, and be creative yourselves. That's what Jack did all the time with the kids he ran into. They would expect him to be Mr. Beatnik, and he would end up getting them all interested in developing their minds and spirits. He was a lot different than the cliched image that we've been force-fed. I know because I was there. I was part of it, and I still am.
David, we're going to cut in for a moment and play the video from the top of the show that we missed and then pick up reading right back there, if that's okay with you, because it's Greenwich Village and you were right there. So we're going to play it. It's 3 minutes and we'll come right back to your read.
Fine.
You got it, Anthony?
Can I continue reading because there's no sound?
Let's see if we got the sound up. 1 second, David.
Okay, as I was saying,
Back to you.
Sort of like Kerouac's books, said the young woman. That's what brought me to this insomniacathon. Ron Whitehead says the same thing you do. He makes you feel you're part of it, not some nerd or geek or total loser sitting outside looking in. Could I go home and get my boyfriend and go out with you for a sandwich? I see on the program you have an hour before your next session. My boyfriend plays guitar and writes poems and goes to college with me, but his parents want him to be an insurance broker or a businessman. His dad was a coal miner, but now most of the mines are closed. His dad grew up real poor. He wants my boyfriend to be secure in life. Maybe you could talk to him. My name's Katie. I'd be glad to, Katie, I said. Katie left and came back about 10 minutes later with a young kid who couldn't have been more than 15. My boyfriend couldn't make it here till later, she said. This is my neighbor, Ted. He wants to meet you. We went around the corner to a down-home barbecue fast food eatery where the heavenly smell of grease, barbecue sauce, fried fish, simmering okra, and smoldering beef and pork were like an intoxicating perfume of the soul to a Yankee with southern roots like myself. "You like this kind of food?" she asked. "I thought you was some kind of non-meat eating Buddhist or something." "No," I said, "I'm what they call a Jewish fallen vegetarian. I'm like Jack. I respect Buddhism as a perfect way to be in your heart and action towards others, but I love the religion I was born into, just as Jack loved the church and went to Mass." We sat down and started demolishing mounds of rich Southern food as I told both of them how happy Jack would be to know that two young Kentuckians from Louisville were reading his books. Ted, the 15-year-old, finally spoke. "Kate invited me to come eat so I could talk to you. I just have two questions. Question number one, are you a beatnik?" Katie looked horrified since she had just been to an hour session where I talked about all the work I had done and was still doing involving Jack's writings. "No," I said patiently, and went into a 15-minute monologue about the subject. "Oh," he said. "I've question number two. All the people you talked about are amazing, but did you know any famous models?" "No, I'm afraid not," I said. "You can see from the way I dress, I'm not too aware of the fashion world, even though it's an interesting and powerful influence on our culture." "Oh, no," said Katie. "Don't say that. You're very retro. That outfit you have on is neat. That garage-type shirt with the two patches on your pockets that says Dave and Peekskill Hollow Farm, we all look for ones like that at the thrift shop." "Well, Katie," I said, "this shirt was given to me by Dave Orr from Lowell, Massachusetts in 1994 after he took me all around Lowell and showed me the Stations of the Cross where Jack used to go as a Boy Scout and at the French Catholic school he attended. Dave's family was French Canadian too, and he had this shirt made for me, and I wear it for special occasions like this. I wore it when I recorded with Jim Sampras, Jack's nephew, providing music for Visions of Cody and Jack Kerouac Reads on the Road. I still wear this shirt for special occasions like this Insomniac-a-thon presented by Ron Whitehead. It's my Lowell spirit connection. And when I'm on the road, I can wear it each day because I can wash it in the shower each night and it's dry the next morning." "That's neat," said Ted. "I want to quit the 10th grade and hitchhike all over America with you. I'll be your roadie. I can meet some beautiful models." "Please," said Katie, looking mortified. "Mr. Amram is a distinguished guest at the festival." "Uh-huh," said the kid. "He's a beatnik like Jack Kerouac. I see it in his eyes. He's got girlfriends all over the world. I want to go with you. We could travel together. I want to be a beatnik like you and Jack both were." "We were never that," I said. "We were collaborators. We shared similar interests. We encouraged and confided in one another. We all hitchhiked in those days. It's different now. The spirit of adventure never changes. The bittersweet poetry of vanishing small-town America is still here. But you have to find your own way of finding it. You could do what my oldest daughter Alana did when she graduated high school. She and her boyfriend took a Greyhound bus across America and hung out at every place that the bus stopped, talking to people and savoring the flavors of speech, dress, body language, food, smell, sight, and hidden feelings that every small place off the beaten track still possesses." "That sounds stupid," he said. "I don't want to sit on a bus looking out the window. I don't want to go sit on some bus station with a bunch of losers. I want to hitchhike to New York and then to San Francisco and be a beatnik and meet some famous models. I want to get out of Louisville and go with you and see the world. You could be fine for all your roadies. I'll be your roadie for nothing. I don't have any roadies, I said. I carry my own stuff and meet rent whatever I need. In our era, that's what everyone did. Duke Ellington crisscrossed America mostly by a car with his baritone saxophonist Harry Carney. Lionel Hampton often rode on the same bus as his band. Ramble and Jack Elliott drove his own motorhome to most of his gigs and still does. Sometimes one or more of my three kids comes with me and helps out, driving and performing with me at jazz, folk, or world music and spoken word festivals. If I'm conducting a symphony, they come along, but I don't have to carry too much for those concerts, just a baton and a score. I could come with you and set up a booth and sell T-shirts of you and Jack Kerouac and photos and programs and recordings you guys did together, he said, looking unfazed. Katie looked up at Ted imploringly. For heaven's sakes, stop it right now. Don't you see Mr. Amram doesn't need you to do any of this? If he did, he would ask you. Ted, I appreciate your offer, I said, but I don't sell stuff like that. You can't merchandise a relationship. We were friends. We were collaborators. Jack just wanted people to read his book. I just want people to hear my music. Well, said Ted, maybe you'll find a spot for me. You got your own spot already, I said. You have the most important thing. You're interested. You're aware. You want to search out new places and find out what they mean to you and other people. That's a lifetime journey, and you could take it by yourself without anybody, and everybody you meet will further that. Always try to pay attention to everything. I'm still trying to do that myself. That's what Jack did. Even with the grief of his final years, he kept on searching. All this has nothing to do with being a beatnik. There really was no such thing. That was just a stereotype that became so popular. Some people who felt they had no identity tried to play that role so that they could feel that they were somebody, which, of course, they were. Everybody is somebody. That's what Hondo Crouch, mayor of Lukenbach, Texas population, said was the motto of his town. Hondo had the saying, everybody is somebody in Lukenbach. I wish you could have met him. He had more to do with the spirit of Jack Kerouac than all the beat mystique that ever existed. But I seen the beatniks on TV. I saw Maynard G. Krebs on a rerun of the old Dobie Gillis show. They were actors, Ted. They were just doing their job. But the characters they were playing were built from stereotypes. None of us acted like that. Then how am I ever going to meet beautiful girls and famous models? He said, looking crestfallen. I'm the shortest kids in my 10th grade class. I'm overweight. I wear glasses. Other kids make fun of me. Katie's my only friend, and she's a foot taller than me. All the kids at school think I'm different from them. Can I read you a poem? Sure, I said. I'd like to hear it. Ted took a neatly folded pack of papers from his pocket and read his poem. It was honest and touching, describing how he felt lonely and misunderstood, and how the clouds he saw moving over a Kentucky night were floating towards a place he had never been and wanted to see. How was that? He said. Great, I said. That was you. That was all about how you felt. I can't finish it, he said. I got stuck. Just continue the story, I said. Talk about where the clouds might be going. Talk about following the clouds out of the picture from your mind and allow them wherever they lead you. Put yourself and the reader up there in those clouds and tell them how we appear below. Just let your mind be free to travel to distant places, and we'll be traveling right along with you. We'll be each other's roadies on those trips. That's what Jack did as a writer. and what he did when we hung out together and shared each other's stories. How could you guys make up stuff on the spot? Did you plan all those things you did at the readings? Nah, I said. Whenever we got together, whether there was an audience or just us, we did whatever we felt we wanted to share. We always listened to each other, just like I'm listening to you. We always tried to encourage each other to continue whatever it was we were working on or wanted to work on at that moment, just like I'm doing with you right now. So what you're saying is I can be a poet and a writer someday? You already are, I said. You just read me a poem that you wrote. You don't have to become a beatnik. You don't have to leave Louisville. Come on later tonight to the Insomniacathon and read what you read to me now, and I'll back you up on piano and double D penny whistle. Ron Whitehead can help you. He's a master poet, and he has that same inclusive spirit that Kerouac had. You'll meet other young writers and musicians. You'll be starting your journey. Some young musician will hear you, and you'll inspire him to back you up and to start reading himself. We're all put here to inspire each other. That's what Jack did. Through his work, he's still doing it today. We finished eating and walked back to the Insomniacathon. At about 11:30, the poet Ed Sanders gave a reading of some of his exciting new work and sang an exquisite song he had composed, accompanying himself on a miniature dulcimer strapped from his shoulder. New York poet Steve Dalachinsky read some of his short, incisive, moving poetry. His Brooklyn-flavored intonation was musical and gave all the young people in Louisville a glimpse of the beauty of New York's streets. In his way, Steve was showing everybody in Louisville, through the eloquence of his poetry, the luster of New York's own hidden diamonds in the sidewalk. I was then introduced again and played some music from around the world and made up a spontaneous blues song with rhymes about meeting Katie and her young friend, Ted, just a few hours earlier, and how we had gone out to eat and all the things we talked about. Then I introduced Ted to read his poem. I adjusted the mic so that he would be able to speak directly into it. Take your time, I whispered. There's no rush. Let everybody hear every beautiful word you wrote. I turned to the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, the little rap song I just made up never would have happened, and would have been impossible to have had it happened if it hadn't happened. Here's the young man responsible for the happenings, Mr. Ted. Jack used to always tell young writers that their questions to him would provide the answers to a lot of things in their life, because searching for answers was itself a path and a road towards understanding and sharing the spirit. People used to freak out because they wanted to be told what to do by him. He would always say over and over again that they had to find out for themselves in their own way by asking anybody and everybody. So after we hear Ted read his poem for the first time, ladies and gentlemen, please come up and ask him about it. So now, ladies and gentlemen, after hearing music from Cairo, Egypt, the Khyber Pass, which connects Pakistan to Afghanistan, a Lakota round dance melody from South Dakota, and a blues I just made up from the remaining brain cells of my once promising mind, we're going to hear a new work from your own hometown boy, Ted, from Louisville. Let's give a warm Abraham Lincoln Rail Splitter Kentucky Derby Mint Julep Insomniacathon late night early morning southern welcome to that sentimental gentleman of swing and a poet. Don't you know it? Louisville's own native son, the fabulous Mr. Ted. The bemused chuckles from the audience were accompanied by applause and enthusiastic rebel yells. I saw Ted's face change, and instead of being petrified, his eyes became clear. He stood up straight, and for the first time that evening, he was smiling. Thank you, everybody. David used to play for Jack Kerouac. Now he's playing for me. I'm going to read you my new poem. Okay, David, take it away, man. He sounded like an old Borscht Belt summer camp program director trapped in a 15-year-old's body. I started playing an ethereal high register Chopin-esque melody on the piano, and Ted began reading. I flashed back 45 years to a bring your own bottle party at a loft in lower Manhattan when Jack, after blowing everybody away, reading a portion of a still unpublished part of On the Road, invited a shy young painter to read her tribute to her grandmother, who in the poem told her to dare to go for it and be an artist and still love all of the rest of the family who were continually putting her down for daring to dream. After she completed reading her poem, he put his right arm over her shoulder like a big brother and lifted her left arm up in the air as if she were a newly crowned world champion athlete acknowledging the thunderous applause of thousands of people at some distant stadium. I remember Jack smiling at her and telling her she was touched by angels. Ted was reading up a storm. He was transformed from a confused kid into a poet, performer, young man. He finished his poem, which was much longer than the version he'd read at the restaurant, as he had included a lot of ad-libs. There was a burst of applause and more rebel yells. He finally raised his hands. Thank you. Thank you. That's the first and only poem so far for me, but I got a lot more to come. Turning to me, his face flushed with happiness, he said, let's have a hand for my company, David Ombrands. Take a bow, Mr. Ombrands. He walked off the stage into the audience, and Katie gave him a bear hug and kissed the top of his head. Other young men and women came up to him and congratulated him. Ted was beaming. Ron Whitehead came up to me. That was incredible, David, he said. I've seen that kid at other events, and he never said a word to anyone except Katie. It's like he discovered himself and his own worth. That's the job of the older cats, I said, to take that holy moly out of the penitentiary and release it from its cell where it's been pickled in bottles of formaldehyde. We have a great creativity and need to give a presidential pardon and release the spirit from the maximum security prison of exclusivity. Don't go away, said Ron. You're on again for an hour. See if you can round up some new talent to join you. We can't get enough of that holy moly. An hour later, I was ready for my next concert. I invited two musicians, both my own age, a tuba player and a tenor saxophone player I had met in the lobby, to join me in a mini jam session. They were there to see younger members of their families participate in the Insomniac-a-thon. I rapped with them for a few minutes and found out they had a Dixieland band in Louisville and had just finished playing a concert. We'll play the blues in F, and I'll make up a whole bunch of words about meeting you in the lobby and what it's like being in Louisville again. And meeting baseball immortal Pee Wee Reese and his wife and son Mark Reese in Louisville when I was here to honor Hunter S. Thompson recently, and have my saxophone concerto recorded here by the Louisville Symphony. That was back in the 80s. Have you got all that written down? Asked the tenor player. Nah, I said. I just thought of it. Maybe I'll do something else. But the three of us together, all 70 years old or older here in 2001, we can't go wrong. We'll show the kids 3 70-year-olds can give them more than paying $60 to watch a group of musicians forced to play what they themselves can't stand. We'll sock it to them. What an ensemble. Tuba, tenor sax, and the remains of a French hornist doubling on everything else I brought with me. Just the three of us. Big bands are back. Well, sounds like too much fun to pass on this, said the tenor sax player. I'm ready to hit. Well, this sounds like too much fun for me too, I said. I'm getting my horn. I'm getting my inch horn too, said the tuba player. Wait until my grandkids hear this. What a gas. Three of us. Big bands are back. They left the lobby, went to their car, and returned with their instruments. I gave them a thumbnail sketch of what other tunes we might play in addition to my made-up song, and we walked out on the stage and played for about an hour. The younger members of the audience were transfixed, seeing three older men obviously having fun making music together for the first time. The musicians played their hearts out and were surrounded by everyone in the audience afterwards. I didn't know you did that kind of stuff, Grandpa, said one of the younger kids as he hugged the pant leg of the tuba player. I didn't know I did either, Bubba, but we did it, said the tuba player, picking his grandson off the ground and giving him a bear hug. I went back with Ron Whitehead to his place at about 2 a.m., and after we talked about the next day's program, where I would introduce Pull My Daisy and Lowell Blues, two films I had worked on about Jack, Ron said, when you and Jack started in these first jazz poetry readings in New York in 1957, ever since then, he's become a major influence. It just happened naturally, Ron, I said. It would have happened anyway. We all need each other. Acknowledging the need and fulfilling that need in the right spirit makes all the months of work worth this effort, said Ron. When you see those young kids discover that special part of themselves that they never knew was there and are able to share with the kids their own age and younger and bring their parents along to check it all out, well, that's what it's all about. That's what you call, and the Insomniacathon, those are what it's all about, I said. Meeting that need, creating a loving space and a happy home for that spirit, keeping it down home and for real, in the spirit of Jack. And next week we're going to speak about going to Northport, where Jack lived with his mom, and our guest is going to be the great photographer and filmmaker Chris Felver, who's going to speak about that. And the week after that, we're having the person who was one of the founders of the Kerouac House and a wonderful author, journalist, Mr. Bob Keeling, is also going to be one of our guests. And now we were scheduled to have the video, if the sound is working.
Yes. So David, the video is the one we were going to play at the top of the show from Greenwich Village. Maybe you could announce that one.
Yeah, that's the one. The video we're going to play, which we spontaneously thought we'd play in the middle, but it didn't work. But now we know it will. I mean, it did work, but you couldn't hear the sound. This was taken by some people who wanted to know something, not about beat, schlago, the usual cliched trash. Actually wanted to know about Greenwich Village, since that's where the so much did take place, as well as Lowell, Massachusetts, throughout the South, throughout all of America, and in Europe when I was there in the Army, before On the Road ever came out or anyone heard of Jack Kerouac. This has been going on since before Columbus showed up here. It's always been an amazing country full of people wandering and searching and caring for one another. Anyway, I tried to give them kind of a picture, and amazingly enough, the company was not interested in the usual 5 things that they thought to find a place. So I just tried it my very best to share what I was lucky enough to bump and stumble into by living in the village all those years. And this was the program that they did, and I'm so happy that you can see it. And if I look a little younger than I do now, that's because this is 2021, and I think this was made in the 1980s and 90s. But the village is still there, and the spirit of the village will still be there, just as O. Henry, writing Rose of Washington Square in the 19th century, he might come back and say, man, it ain't the same no more. That's not exactly what he'd say, but his story is still alive, and Washington Square is still there. Just things change, but the spirit always remains pure and always remains relevant.
I'm Paul Messina in Greenwich Village at McDougal and Bleecker, once the crossroads of the Beat generation.
The streets used to be jammed and crowded with people walking up and down. Every place you went, there was music playing of all different kinds.
Musician David Amram has composed more than 100 orchestral and chamber music works, but some know him best as a friend and contemporary of Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac, famed writers who captured the essence of the Beat generation. You might call them beatniks, but hold on, Amram says beatnik is derogatory.
The whole idea of what they called the Beat generation was really to celebrate Jack's idea of the beatitude, of the sacredness of life.
So in celebration of the creative vibes in Greenwich Village, Amram took us for a walk down McDougal Street, a street he once knew well.
And walking down McDougal Street sometimes would take an hour or two. One night, Odetta and I stood out here for 3 hours and never got off the corner of the block, just talking to people that came by.
It was a time of great creativity spurred on by the sharing of ideas in the coffee houses here. So it should be no surprise that it was here in Greenwich Village that Amram and Jack Kerouac performed the first jazz poetry reading.
We did that first jazz poetry reading 41 years ago, a few blocks from here, never dreaming it would become a national fad.
Yet it did. And 41 years later, some of the old crowd and the new crowd gathered for a reunion of sorts at one of their old haunts, Le Figaro Cafe.
I said to myself, wow, what'll Denver be like? I got on that hot road.
As Amram played, he was accompanied by readings from Kerouac's book, On the Road.
Sherry started to play his chords. They rolled out his piano like great rich showers. You think the man wouldn't have time to line them up, because they rolled, and they rolled like the sea.
But in addition to the people and the creativity, it's the neighborhood that Amram remembers fondly.
I'm glad to see that it's still here. Mostly I feel blessed that I have the memories of when it was a special place in our lives.
There's just one more thing you should know. Amram passes this advice along from Kerouac, Ginsberg, Thelonious Monk, and Charlie Parker.
Which is, if you're told what you're doing is hopeless, it's a waste of time, and there's no future in it, perhaps the people who are telling you that love you, they might even be related to you, and they might care about you, but hang out with somebody else.
In Greenwich Village, Paul Messina, New York 1.
So with
That was interesting.
I love that vid.
And I don't remember if that was a New York one. Yeah, that was a local New York station. I was very lucky. And my daughter Adira, who's now totally grown up, was the young woman who was reading. And I think a lot of us are beginning to realize that wherever you are, it's the big time. And with the internet, you can be any place that you never might get to, because if you have a computer, you can turn it on and find that place and see that place. And if it's something that's online, you could even study it 10 or 12 times and then go on and find something else and realize there's a big world out there, and we're all welcome to learn about it and participate in it and hopefully make a contribution to it ourselves. That's the whole idea. That's why I wrote the book, Offbeat, collaborating with Kerouac. And so many of his books really describe that wonderful, warm feeling. And that's the reason why his books now reach millions of people. And since the publishers didn't really care much for him and the critics turned on him and a lot of his old friends bailed out, he was unfashionable, the worst crime you could commit after being in fashion. He wasn't interested in that. And as a result, all those beautiful things that he wrote sold themselves. And his books are translated in languages, and it's just thrilling to see that, and to see the music and the poetry and the paintings, and to see all the young people today who aren't wearing berets, pace-on goatees, big eyeglasses with no lenses, and trying to be beatniks or trying to be anything except themselves, and creating their own environment and their own work. And that's the whole idea. That's what we hope this program could do to encourage you. And if you're a grown-up type person, encourage your kids and grandkids to be that way and hang out with them, and they'll show you a whole lot of new stuff, which is my delight of having kids myself and my grandson. I learn from them just as much. And I know, Pam, you have another video you wanted to show.
Yeah, so we have our intermission. Welcome, Ron Whitehead. And perhaps Ron could introduce this. It's Hunter S. Thompson Fiesta that you organized.
So, ladies and gentlemen,
He's just on
I'd
mic
like
now.
to
Hi, Ron. Welcome.
Introduce amazing man.
Well, I guess it's going to roll. So how about after?
Okay.
The sun shines bright on my old Kentucky home. In summer, her workers are gay. The corn stalks dry and the meadows in the bloom, while the birds make music all the day. The young folks play on that little cabin floor, all merry, all happy and bright. By and by, hard times come a-knocking at my door, then my old Kentucky home, good night. Oh, we know
And Ron Whitehead organized that whole amazing event. If we spent the time mentioning all of his credits, we'd need a 13-hour program and only get started. So rather than doing that, you can look him up on the internet and realize he's written over 30 books, produced so many CDs, concerts, been all over the world. We played together in London, in the Netherlands, in Louisville, in Nashville, and very often in New York City and other places. And he's a mainstay. And we played the very first time at 1994 at that monster event celebrating the Beat Generation, so-called, of Jack Kerouac, and a busload of kids came up, and they, with Ron leading them as a teacher, blew the place down by just giving the most wonderful readings, and all of them were reading their own poetry as well as Jack Kerouac's. And I realized there's someone who is showing people how to be themselves and how to be creative. Can't do better than that. And he's a great poet and a great friend. So please welcome, ladies and gentlemen, all the way from Louisville, Kentucky, Mr. Ron Whitehead.
Oh, David, thank you. Thank you. I'm honored to be on here with you. And it's always amazing and a blessed gift to talk with you on the phone, in person, and just to hang out with you. And so, and we have, listening to you read and talk, just so many memories came back to me about that moment at New York University when we first met in person. Of course, I'd known about you for years, but that was, Allen Ginsberg and Ann Waldman and Gregory Corso were in the audience. It was at the Student Center there, the Loeb Student Center, at the end of the 48-hour nonstop music and poetry Insomniac-a-thon, which I had been invited to produce to kick off the week-long 50-year celebration of the Beat Generation. And it was 7 days and nights of just spectacular energy. And I brought 150 young people, high school and college age. A handful of students from Naropa University came from Boulder and joined us in Louisville, and we caravanned up. And I was the only so-called adult who was supposed to be watching out for them for a week. And I was just thankful that nobody died. It was amazing. I was praying like nonstop the whole time I was producing that stuff. Oh my God. And I heard stories later. I still hear stories to this day that's like raised the hair on my back of my neck. I was so glad I wasn't with those kids when they were out doing all the things they were doing. But the great gift was that everywhere I walked for the 48 hours and for that entire week, there were clusters of students hanging out with all the leading figures of the Beat Generation, all of whom were there, including Ted Jones. He showed up. And so they got an education. They got a college education in that 1 week they were in New York City. And that's what I have been, and in 1992, February the 4th, anniversary's coming up, I founded the Global Literary Renaissance with the goal of home basing in Louisville and creating a global community of poets and writers, but artists from all walks of life, all inclusive. And just in the past year, I have realized that goal has been achieved and accomplished. And I'm so thankful for the open hearts wherever I go. I not only preach the Kentucky gospel, but I preach the gospel of when one of us is lifted up, we're all lifted up. We're all in this together, shoulder to shoulder, eyeball to eyeball. And So it's all down home to me. When I meet people, I'm always respecting our beautiful differences while looking for what we have in common. And as soon as I met David Amram in person, man, it was just like, okay, this is my brother here. You know, we've been hanging out in different places, but we're on the same team. We're in the same family. And we have done so much work together. Insomniacathons in New Orleans was another one that in 1996, December, when I produced that incredible 4-hour Hunter S. Thompson tribute, standing room only. I brought everybody in for a week. Well, earlier that year in August, Doug Brinkley, our friend, historian Douglas Brinkley, and I produced a 48-hour nonstop music and poetry insomniacathon in New Orleans, which is one of the most incredible insomniacathons ever. You talking about some of the most gifted people and talent, from the Magnolias, the Wild Magnolias, Mary Baraka, Robert Creeley, David Amram, Ramblin' Jack Elliott. It's just Ed Sanders, just a long list of like world-class headliner performers. And we ended up at the Howlin' Wolf Club the last 12 hours.
You wrote a poem about that, didn't you?
Do what?
I know you were going to read a poem about that experience. When
Yeah.
Frank Messina took me there at 5 o'clock in the morning. I said, Frank, I don't know, man. 5 o'clock in the morning, I'm not sure if people want to hear poetry. They're all out there partying up a storm. And Frank said the classic words, "Don't worry about it, man. I'm from New York. I'll take care of it." And he cooled. He was so strong. It ended up being one of the best ones that we ever did. But you wrote about the whole event. Maybe you could read. I know you'd planned on reading that. Could you read that one now?
You ready?
We're ready.
Okay. Keep the funk, shooting up poetry in New Orleans. It's August 1996, and I'm in New Orleans, standing outside the Howlin' Wolf Club. I'm here to produce yet another Beat Generation spirited 48-hour nonstop music and poetry insomniacathon, and I've been burning up the road day and night with no end in sight. I'm feeling burnt out, tired to the bone, so I'm searching for a fix of poetry to shoot into my blood, to rejuvenate my spirit. I'm calling on Jack Kerouac and Neil Cassidy and Bill Burroughs, but I haven't found my orgone accumulator, my new poetry yet, and my head is hanging so low it's dragging the ground. I've known nothing but failure lately, and I've been burning the candle at both ends so long there's nothing left of me but smoke and ashes. So I'm wondering if the time has finally arrived for me to become cinder for that long distance, never-ending railroad track to nowhere. My spirit screams out for help, and in a flash I hear Allen Ginsberg whisper, "Take a hand, share the word." And out of the blue, the poetry gospel starts flowing through my groin and my gut and my heart and my head. And my, oh my, I jump and shout and sing. Yes, right in front of the Howlin' Wolf Club. I'm grabbed hold of by the poetry spirit, and now someone's singing and banging on a piano. So I open the door and peek in, and lo and behold, there's David Amram doing double note crossovers and over and unders. He's doing his ooh la mala walla and zoo zoo ya ya. He's playing and scat singing in tongues right here in the middle of the holy New Orleans afternoon. And out of the blue, I find the poetry I've been looking for. I look up, and there's the full moon smiling at me from over the Mississippi River, and I think of Algiers and Bill Burroughs and Jack Kerouac and Neil Cassidy, and I think of Neil's flame gone, gone, gone. His naked body lying beside those long distance, never ending railroad tracks to nowhere. And I hope all the poets and musicians performing at this 48-hour nonstop music and poetry insomniacathon Hell, I hope all of us keep the funk, keep that creative flame alive. Don't let the system break you. Don't let life break you. And I hear David Amram playing that piano and singing his Pull My Daisy and Never Give Up blues. And in that moment, I know my reward is in the experience of poetry. And right here, right now, I'm in New Orleans with all these poets and musicians who somehow know the magical power of poetry. The word sets us free. And I think about Allen Ginsberg and what he said about taking somebody's hand, because we're all in this together. We're pulling, we ain't pushing, we're letting it be. We realize that when one of us is lifted up, we're all lifted up. And I realize that poetry is life and life is poetry. And I feel an energy rising through me, growing strong, coming from poets and musicians of all ages. And I don't feel like failure anymore. I feel good. I feel strong. I feel reborn into poetry, into life. And it feels like resurrection, rebirth into poetry right here, right now. Keep the funk shooting up poetry in New Orleans.
Great. Can I ask you, Ron, there was another one of my favorites that you wrote when we were at the Bowery Poetry Club, and then we went over to the New York Rican Poets Cafe, where I played with all the great Latin musicians that I knew in New York. And there was a group of African American and Latino rappers came all the way from Philadelphia, not to mention in the East Coast, for their big rap, hip hop, get down with the get down freestyling contest. And they were sitting there waiting to go on, and begrudgingly, since we were on first, they were sitting there waiting. And when you got up and read your poem, was a Kentucky Farm Boy about your mom shooting down the Christmas tree that was so fantastic. And that blew the house down. All the other work everybody enjoyed, but when you read it, and a lot of the other poets said, how come this white guy from Kentucky, farm boy, total southerner, was able to blow all those people away? And I said, because it was real. It was from the heart, and he was telling his story, just as Lester Young told all of us in music. It's very impressive what you know, but now I'd like to hear your story. And that one poem was just so amazing, and that book that you wrote about stuff with your mom is just incredible. And I would just request if you do that, because that to me was said everything about what we all can do, and that each of us has a precious story of our own.
Okay, David. Well, I grew up in a time between times. I grew up on the thin line between the pioneer past and the science fiction future, a cataclysmic age of change. And this is about the pioneer land I grew up in. It's titled Mama. Mama killed chickens. She popped their heads off, put her foot on the little hen's head, grabbed its legs, and jerked hard. The head just lay there on the grass while the little chicken body went flopping all over the yard. Us kids ran like crazy, dodging chicken blood. I liked it better when Mama took the .22 rifle to the barn and would shoot a little hen off the high rafter up near the top of the barn where the chickens all roosted. Mama was a good shot. One Christmas Eve, there was a terrible storm. Daddy was off at the mines. Mama said, come on. And all us kids piled into the back of the old pickup truck. Mama had the shotgun. We drove slow through the storm with Mama looking all around. Then she pulled over and said, come on. We followed. We walked a ways until we came up on a tree, a cedar tree, and Mama said, get behind me. We did. And she took aim and shot the tree in the trunk with both barrels, blew it clean in two. Mama said, y'all get the Christmas tree and come on. Us kids let out a yell. We were so happy because Christmas had finally come. That's a true story. Mama is 89 now. She's a little woman, but you don't ever want to piss her off, let me tell you.
Another one, Ron, since Jim Canary is here, you told me, which I never knew, about the time that you and Jim Canary and the Dalai Lama were all together in his hometown. And says, Jim, I know you're there. Maybe you and Ron could tell us about that, because I'd love to hear that myself. So Jim Canary, Jim, are you out there still?
Hi, James.
I've got to unmute here. Okay.
That's the spirit.
Yeah, we're so fortunate. The Dalai Lama's elder brother taught here for many years, and So we were fortunate to have the Dalai Lama visit us on numerous occasions. And I think you came up, what, Ron, when he was doing the Kalachakra, or was it that time?
It was the dedication of the new
Oh,
Tibetan Mongolian World Peace Center when he and Muhammad Ali met
yeah.
for the first time. I was there, right up there, to witness that. And it was a day of spiritual leaders from all over the world, all religions, all spiritualities, singing songs, reciting poems, saying words. And it was a day filled, it was a day of healing, filled with tears, laughter, and joy. It was an amazing gift to be one of the, I think a couple thousand people were invited, and security was ultra tight because the Dalai Lama had just received new death threats. In China had just made him public enemy #1. And of course, I wrote the poem, Never Give Up poem with him. And that's why I was invited to the
Yeah,
event.
I was wondering, can you read that poem? Do you have that available? That was great.
Well, I have it with me always because in April of '94, a month before David and Amram and I met for the first time in New York, I had the opportunity. I had brought Lawrence Ferlinghetti to Louisville for a week-long visit. Lawrence and I had done a lot of work together, and we visited the Abbey of Gethsemane in an hour south of Louisville, where Thomas Merton spent the second half of his life. And on the drive back to Louisville, Ferlinghetti said, why don't you bring the Dalai Lama? He would love to come and visit Merton's grave. He's never been to Kentucky. And so I worked for a year to bring him. I ended up having the opportunity to ask him one question. And so I told him about the event at NYU and about all the young people who would be performing at my event. And would you please, Your Holiness, share with me a message I could then share with young people of all ages. And he closed his eyes and gave me a long message. And this is recorded, and an animated version is going to be included in this new documentary that's going to be coming out on me later this year, of the Dalai Lama's, me asking the Dalai Lama and his response to me, but through some kind of spiritual transmission. It's never happened to me before. All I heard when the Dalai Lama was talking were the words to the poem, Never Give Up, which after he was done giving me the message, he walked over to me. And I had been looking down at the carpet because the meeting was over and he was leaving to go to the next meeting. And I didn't think he was coming. I thought it was done. And I looked up and there was the Dalai Lama standing in front of me. And so I felt like a little kid. I felt his energy, this aura of peace emanating from him. And I just put my hand up. I was sitting in a chair with people around me, and he grabbed my hand in both of his and squeezed it and closed his eyes and bowed, blessing the message. And so I went on to New York, and as soon as I left, I wrote the poem down, Never Give Up. Never give up, no matter what is going on around you, never give up. Develop the heart. Too much energy in the world is spent developing the mind instead of the heart. Develop the heart. Be compassionate, not just for your friends, but for everyone. Be compassionate. Work for peace. In the world and in your heart, work for peace. And I say again, never give up. No matter what is going on around you, never give up. And so I wrote that, I hand wrote my poem down. I sent it to the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala, India, and asked for his blessing and told him I wanted to publish it in a poster. I needed a photo of him and his blessing, both of which he sent me. Produced a multitude, many different editions of the poster, and I've given like thousands of them to Buddhist monks and nuns and to students, and sold a few along the way. But people keep telling me I should sell a few of the things that I produce. But it was like a blessed gift
Yeah.
And
Like,
and
you
I
want like,
share that poem wherever I go, and it's been in National Geographic, it's on banners, it's all over the world. It's been in 2 of his books, and half the time it doesn't even have my name on it. And I have told um, people that, I don't care if it's got my name on it or not. I feel like Johnny Appleseed. It was a gift to me, and wherever that the seed of that poem can be planted, whether my name's on it or not, it will hopefully uplift and inspire people. And I received letters from people from all over the world who let me know how it's helped them and impacted them. So thanks for asking me, Jim. It's
That's
good
a
to see you. Good to see you.
Yeah. Hey, when things get better, you should come up and we should print a small edition of that on Tibetan paper.
I would love it. Let's
Yeah,
do it.
let's do
It's a
it.
deal. It's a
I
deal.
love it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want one, please. I would like to have one, please, Jim Canary.
We'll make sure.
Ron, we actually have a little video we want to run of you doing Stormwatch. Are you up with that? Are you ready to go, Anthony?
All set.
All right, let's hit it.
The Storm Generation Manifesto. We tip our hats to the lost and the beat. We go our own way. We are the Storm Generation. We are the fucking storm. We are a new generation of artists. We are poets, writers, painters, sculptors, composers, musicians, singers, dancers, playwrights, filmmakers. We are creative expression. We blow away lies and injustice. We are graphic. We are honest. We tell it like it is. We are fierce. We are brutal. We are compassionate. We are gentle. We are kind. We have soft hearts. We are free. We are spirit. We are sex. We dwell in the realms of the creative imagination. We are the creative imagination. We know that the shortest distance between 2 points is creative distance. We pay attention to the long forgotten wisdom voices of the forest. We vanquish the overtly materialistic greedy who intentionally destroy mountains. We honor mountains and oceans and eagles and wolves. We cherish Mother Earth and all her terrible beauty. We are non-violent spiritual warriors. We are lightning. We are thunder. We are song poems. We are fearless visionary poets. We have wolf eyes. We are more than the eye of the storm. We are the fucking storm. We refuse. We will not bow down. We will never give up. We are God's open nerve. We are the Storm Generation. The storm. The storm. The storm.
All right. And
That's something to just wake up in the morning and just push play.
For those of you who are having the snowstorm,
Every day.
a lot of you are probably having a snowstorm. We're just having one here way in Beacon, New York. Ron was all right because we're all the storm generation now, 100 million people. And Ron, that was beautiful. And I think that shows so many different sides of what you do. And there are not too many college professors like yourself, but there's more than ever. And the hope, I guess, is that the academy, which is a wonderful thing, will begin to accept all the variety and the beauties of all the way people speak and talk and read and live and write. That's what Jack was so much about, and that's what everybody is about. And since we're all trained to pretend to be Oxford attending university professors and with fake English accents, with tweed coat, with patches on his sleeve, and not act like ourselves, that's an impediment. And that's all changing. And now, of course, what you've been doing your whole life and what Jack did his whole life and so many other artists that we admire now have set the stage. So now with the good old internet, people can actually get another point of view. There's not one thing. And I think all of us share that in common, that we're aware there's a big world out there. We're here for a while and try to contribute something to it. And you've certainly always done that and still do it. And now your kids are doing it. And all those people that I wrote about who were in the Insomniac-a-thon back in the 90s or 80s, whenever that was, they're probably having their kids doing that too. And that's the whole idea. And I only want to mention that because we're so enslaved by fashion and trends that the stereotype of the, as I mentioned, the Beverly Hillbillies and Hee Haw were a lot of fun on television, but they don't represent the entire cultural traditions and achievements in the South, and the poets and the painters and the writers and the blues and the jazz musicians and the actors and athletes and doctors and lawyers and everything else. Where would we be without them? So in a certain way, what you do helps to bring the world together. And I think that's what we're all trying to do. And I know you have a guest panel if she could make a Chloe.
Yes, Chloe's gonna come on
I'm
in a little
here.
bit.
Great.
You're here.
I'm here.
Hello, Chloe.
Can you
How
hear
are
me?
you, dear? I hear you loud and clear.
I just joined.
Hello. So Chloe is an amazing artist. That's all of her art behind, and a clothing designer and an actress and a singer, and makes incredible surfboards and guitars. And welcome.
Thank you. I just saw Pamela. Okay, thank you. Nice to meet you, everybody. I heard so much good things about everybody on here from Pamela. So it's great to see everybody. And also, I just saw that you sent me another text to read.
Yes.
So I haven't.
Chloe just jumped over from an event she was at, and so Chloe's going to read from Satori in Paris, but we also want to run this amazing video, the Jesus Oaxaca video of yours, Ron. So we're going to segue with some Jesus into that video. Ron meet Chloe, Chloe meet Ron Whitehead and David Amram. And
Chloe, I want to thank you too. The name of the program is called Amram Reads Amram, but I already read Amram and heard myself enough. And it's the name of the book that I was reading is called Offbeat Collaborating with Kerouac. And what we were talking about was how anybody and everybody can get together and do something respectfully for one another. So we're glad that you could come on and present a whole different point of view, and also to show our readers that you don't have to be a 90-year-old man as I am in order to be authentic or have somebody to contribute. I was one of the millions of people. I was lucky enough to know Jack and lucky enough to hear about you from Pamela and know about all the stuff that you've done. And you're reading part of Jack's beautiful book will be something that no one could expect, and it couldn't have been nicer if we planned it. But the best things in life are for free and come spontaneously. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's give an internet applause at home, because we won't interrupt her, to Ms. Chloe Trujillo.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, and I mean, I don't know, does everybody know that I'm from Paris, France? So this is probably part of the reason why I'm reading this, this Satori in Paris.
Exactly. Exactement.
Exactement. Except that I didn't see. I think your new text. I'm gonna have to look through my phone. I think you send me the attachment, and part of it is in French, but it's yeah. We'll talk about that.
Okay.
Okay. Somewhere during my 10 days in Paris and Brittany, I received an illumination of some kind that seems to have changed me again toward what I suppose be my pattern for another 7 years or more. In effect, a satori, the Japanese word for sudden illumination, sudden awakening, or simply kick in the eye, whatever. Something did happen, and in my first reverie, after the trip, and I'm back home regrouping all the confused reach events of those 10 days, it seems that the satori was handed to me by a taxi driver named Raymond Bayet. Other times, I think it might have been my paranoid fear in the foggy streets of Brest, Brittany at 3 a.m. Other times, I think it was Monsieur Casteljaloux and his dazzling, beautiful secretary, a Bretonne with blue-black hair, green eyes, separated front teeth, just right in eatable lips, white wool knit sweater with gold bracelets and perfume. Or the waiter who told me Paris est pourri, Paris is rotten. Or the performance of Mozart Requiem in Old Church of Saint-Germain-des-Prés, with elated violinists swinging their elbows with joy because so many distinguished people had shown up, crowding the booths in special chairs and outside it's misting. or in heaven's name, what? The straight tree lane of Tuileries Gardens, or the roaring sway of the bridge over the booming holiday Seine, which I crossed holding on to my hat, knowing it was not the bridge, the makeshift one at Quai des Tuileries. But I myself, swaying from too much cognac and nerves and no sleep and jet airliner all the way from Florida, 12 hours with airport anxieties or bars or anguishes intervening. As in an earlier autobiographical book, I use my real name here, full name in this case, Jean-Louis Lebris de Kerouac. Because this story is about my search for this name in France. And I'm not afraid of giving the real name of Raymond Baillet to public scrutiny, because all I have to say about him in connection with the fact he may be the cause of my Satori in Paris is that he was polite, kind, efficient, hip, aloof, and many other things, and mainly just a cab driver who happened to drive me to Orly Airfield on my way back home from France. And sure, he wouldn't be in trouble because of that. And besides, probably never will see his name in print because there are so many books being published these days in America and in France. Nobody has the time to keep up with all of them. And if told by someone that his name appears in an American novel, he'll probably never find out where to buy it in Paris, if it's ever translated at all. And if he does find it, it won't hurt him to read that he, Raymond Baillet, is a great gentleman and cab driver who happened to impress an American during a fair ride to the airport. Compris?
Oui.
I love this. I mean, I just like, I learning more and more about all this Jack Kerouac and everything. And actually, Pamela, last time I was in Paris, there was a big exhibition on the Beat generation at the Centre Georges Pompidou. And anyway, I had a lot of fun, like just visiting and watching videos. And, I even took my kids there, my husband, and we sat there watching videos of all kinds for hours.
If I could just say, je veux bien dire que c'est un grand plaisir à entendre Kerouac parce qu'il a parlé français chez lui jusqu'où il a eu 6 ans. That is to say, it was a joy to hear Jack Kerouac, my own simultaneous translator, because he spoke French till he was 6 years old. He used to speak une espèce de français québécois, a certain style of Québécois French that s'appelle joual. Il disait, je suis canadien français, mais maintenant c'est les choses correctement par moi, parler comme ça. And all the snobs, when they would hear us speaking in French, would be upset. He'd say, I know Victor Hugo would have, je m'étais égaré dans une forêt à quelques distances de la cataracte Niagara. But when he spoke as Ron Whitehead speaks, in his own family community, Québécois, coming over in the 17th century style of French. And that beautiful book that you read part of, Satori in Paris, this is the first time in my life I've ever heard anybody except Jack read from that when we did our readings, because these so-called Beat Generation authorities dismissed the fact that he even had any French heritage. So it's wonderful that you could do this. That's the first time I think that that's happened. You've opened up the door, and thank you so much for doing that. That would mean so much to him.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Merci. So Chloe, I'd like to give you a little minute to look at your email, because I resent the Jesus poem.
Okay.
And I'd love to go to Ron and talk a little bit about Hunter S. Thompson, if we could, and then come back to Chloe. She's going to read about Jesus, and then we'll go into the Jesus Oaxaca poem of our special guest, Ron Whitehead. So Ron, would love to hear more about Hunter S. Thompson and you and David.
Hey, well, is there anything? It was, there's so many stories to tell. Do you have a question in particular?
Well, how'd you meet?
Well, Hunter and I knew of each other. I had the first underground bookstore in Kentucky a long time ago, and I sold all the City Lights books, and I sold anything I wanted books I wanted to read or had read, and vinyl albums. And I had a head shop right next to the underground bookstore. And so I started reading Hunter when Hell's Angels came out. And then I sold the first Rolling Stone magazines that included Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and then the book. Um, and so, but then word is word of mouth is still the best advertising that there is. And so that's still the way I operate. And Hunter and I found out about each other. And then our friend, um, historian Douglas Brinkley, brought a busload of students to the University of Louisville in um, in October of 1994. And Doug and I had he came to Louisville to visit and brought the students. He was on a cross-country trip, but in Louisville, they wanted to visit the Muhammad Ali's home, growing up home, which is a beautiful place. It's been restored now, and Hunter's growing up home. And in one of those conversations, and Doug came to the big Insomniac-a-thon I produced, one of 4 that year, 48-hour one in October 94. Jim Carroll, the Basketball Diaries, was my featured poet. And Doug and I both agreed that it was a shame that nobody had started a movement to honor Hunter in his hometown. And so we looked at each other and simultaneously said, somebody's got to do this. And Doug looked at me and said, well, I don't live here. And I said something like, you jackass. And then, because then we shook hands, I agreed to take on the responsibility of leading that campaign. And we had, and Hunter had been at New York University too. I don't know if that was at the Beat Festival in 94, at the Kerouac Symposium in 95, one or the other. And so there's a brief encounter. There are stories to tell about that as well. I think that was in 94, it was. And, but we ended up, I'd received a death threat in August of 96. I rented a car. And the day I was supposed to get killed, I went to my grandmother Render's funeral, and then I took my 3 kids and my first wife, and we took a 2-week, 5,000-mile Wild West vacation trip to get out of town. Our first stop.
Oh, wait, can I ask, why did you get a death threat?
Well, it's like the postal inspector, 25 police came. I went to pick up my mail at the main post office, and there were big letters written in what looked like blood: Ron Whitehead will die August 20th. And postal inspector asked me, do you have any enemies? And I looked at him and laughed. Any public figure has enemies, whether you know them or not. And so I said, I have no idea. I do what I do regardless of anything. So anyway, and a lot of strange things happened. And so, but our first stop was at Hunter's at Owl Farm in Woody Creek. And my kids had been there in New York. My 2 oldest ones had. And so they knew what Hunter was like. And so as soon as we pulled up there at Owl Farm, the sound was like all over the yard, really loud. Sounded like a bear eating a baby. And we knocked on the door. And we had a wonderful visit with Hunter. We had a great visit. Jack Nicholson called 3 times while we were there. And the first time he was just screaming and cussing. So Hunter had 3 phones, and the main one was, I call it the red phone. It's the main phone where he kept it on the speaker. And Jack was cussing. Jack had come out to watch a heavyweight fight with Hunter. And Hunter didn't know that he brought his 2 daughters with him. And Hunter had broken out a window pane and threw a bunch of firecrackers, lit them, and threw them in the house. And they went off, and they scared the daylights out of Jack Nicholson's daughters. And so Jack was just cussing. It was funny to hear Jack Nicholson on the phone cussing Hunter out while my kids, my family, and I were standing in the kitchen there at Al Farm. But we ended up, he signed some posters. I published He Was a Crook, the Nixon obituary, and some other works by Hunter. And I told him, we had long talk about the Beat Generation, about different members of the Beat Generation. And I told him we were going to have dinner with Lawrence Ferlinghetti. We're going straight from Hunter's house to City Lights to meet Ferlinghetti. And then he took us to a Chinese restaurant down the hill. And so Hunter signed one poster to Lawrence and put a message on it for him. And he signed another one to Sergeant Shriver, who had been the only public figure to praise him for his Nixon obituary. And he asked me to get that to him, which I did. But,
Could I say one thing, Ron? I think
yes.
so much of our pop schlock culture always takes the bad moments or bad behavior and says that's what it's all about. Basically, Hunter's, as you know better than all of us, Hunter's mom was a librarian, and Hunter was one of the best read people of the classics. Just as Gregory Corso acted like a nutcase, but he when he was in jail, he learned more about ancient Greek and Roman writing and antiquity than anyone. And Jack Kerouac, as I'm sure Chloe Trujillo knows, not only loved the English writers, but also read Balzac and Victor Hugo, could recite them from memory. And he not only loved Bach and Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie, he also loved Canteloup, who wrote the Les Chansons d'Auvergne, the songs of the Auvergne, and Darius Milhaud's music, and so many of the other great French composers. And all of these guys were classicists and really knowledgeable and in their off-duty behavior, and never put on airs of acting like the great writer or the great composer or the great anything. They were just themselves, but as hometown boys, so to speak, had this extraordinary knowledge, and their work was what they left us. And they say in the Bible, by your works ye shall be known. So Hunter's books still speak for themselves, and Jack's books still speak for themselves. And when we hear Sartori in Paris, we have to remember how important the French, l'héritage français, the French heritage was, and how people scuffled and suffered when they went to Canada and then came down here trying to figure out who, where, what, and what their identity would be. And of course, Thomas Wolfe always spoke about the great travelings and being lost in America. So eventually, these writers can teach us all that we're all in the same boat. We're all lost souls from another place. We're the old country and the new country. And now the younger folks are beginning to see, when they read Hunter and they read Kerouac and they read the hundreds of great writers and composers and authors and painters and the contemporary people who are so darn good, that there's a lot of different people out here. So everybody's an outsider. Therefore, we've all got that in common. The only people that don't have that mental state are the Native American folks who've been here 50,000 years, and we can never forget that they welcomed everyone when they came here, and they still put up with us. So this is an amazing place to be, and now it's a kind of, you talk about the literary renaissance that you started. Now there's a whole worldwide renaissance, and learning is so important, and that's why it's so great that you could be here and that Chloe could read that beautiful poem. First time I ever know that opened up the door that there was a place called France that has an important part in our cultural history. Just as Hunter, when I knew him in way back before he was published even, before he attacked the soda machine and got fired from the Middletown newspaper, he was like the most brilliant, well-read person that I ever knew. And then, of course, his crazy behavior when he would get, that became so popular, he realized he was more appreciated doing that than
he created
the stuff that he did. I remember when at your festival, how wonderful he was when there was no one around and he was just talking to you or me.
He was a
quiet.
Southern gentleman with a poet's heart and a poet's clear vision. And I was honored that, thank you, David. And I was honored that he asked me to watch out for his mother, Virginia, who I learned more about Hunter through my conversations with Virginia than I ever learned by reading any books, and by just hanging out with Hunter, who was a sweet and gentle person. And it was his persona that eventually killed him, unfortunately, but he was a really good person.
I'd like to make a toast to Hunter. I have a little flask in his honor, and instead of alcohol, because they're all ether in heaven, it's l'amour et l'air fraîche. I'm going to have a little sip to Hunter S. Thompson and to Jack Kerouac. And while we're at it, a little toast to Johnny Depp, who has done so much for the memory of Hunter S. Thompson and was one of the early people traveling, reading Kerouac and knowing Allen Ginsberg, and just a salute to the soul of a fellow actor.
Amen. And Johnny's a really nice guy too. He's a Kentucky boy. A lot of people still don't know that. Johnny and I were born in the same town in Owensboro, Kentucky. I was a few years ahead of him though.
Chloe, are you ready?
I have printed one sheet. The other one is print. My printer was acting weird, so it's easier because as I'm watching you on the screen and to have to read from the screen, it would have looked like this. So it's like,
It's just the Jesus part in French, which is going to introduce the Ron Whitehead video.
Okay, so it starts, Jésus a été crucifié, this part. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I'll do it.
Okay, good. Just the French, please.
Okay, juste le français. Jésus a été crucifié parce que, à place d'amener de l'argent et le pouvoir, il a amené seulement l'assurance que l'existence a été formée par le bon Dieu et elle appartient au bon Dieu, le Père, et lui, le Père, va nous élever au ciel après la mort, où personne n'aura besoin d'argent ou de pouvoir parce que c'est seulement après tout de la poussière et de la rouille. Nous autres, qui n'ont pas vu les miracles de Jésus comme les Juifs et les Romains, et la petite poignée de Grecs et autres rivières Nil et Euphrate, on a seulement de continuer d'accepter l'assurance qu'il nous a été descendue dans la parole sainte du Nouveau Testament. C'est pareil comme si, en voyant quelqu'un, on dira « c'est pas lui », sans savoir qui est lui. Et c'est seulement le Fils qui connaît le Père. Alors la foi et l'Église qui a défendu la foi comme qu'on pouvait.
Awesome. So Jack Kerouac was quite a soulful religious and Buddhist man, and that's from Satori in Paris talking about Jesus. And now we're going to play Ron Whitehead's Jesus in Oaxaca. Thank you, Chloe.
You're welcome.
Hold up in Oaxaca, we'd reached the end of the line. The government was against us. An army waited for us outside. Jesus wasn't nervous. He never was, but neither was I. Hold up in Oaxaca, we'd reached the end of the line. Jesus was a wanderer. Wherever it was, we'd been there a time or two. Bogota, Buenos Aires, Rio de Janeiro, Machu Picchu in Peru, Tucson, Arizona, New Orleans, Louisiana, Havana, Cuba, Mexico City. Jesus was a wanderer. Wherever it was, we'd been there a time or two. Riding with Rebel Jesus, people turned their heads and stared. Who was that, they asked. Did you see his brown eyes? Did you see his red hair? Jesus, the wanderer, was a mystery to all. Jesus, the wanderer, was a mystery to me. Riding with Rebel Jesus, people turned their heads and stared. How much longer can we hold out? How much further can we go? We're holed up in Oaxaca with the army outside our door. Looks Looks like the journey's over. Our wandering days are done. How much longer can we hold out? How much further can we run? Hold up in Oaxaca, we'd reached the end of the line. The government was against us. An army waited for us outside. Jesus wasn't nervous. He never was. But neither was I. Hold up in Oaxaca, we'd reached the end of the line. Jesus, the wanderer, was a mystery to all. Jesus, the wanderer, was a mystery to me. Riding with rebel Jesus, people turned their heads and stared. We're holed up in Oaxaca with the army outside our door. Looks like the journey's over. Our wandering days are done. How much longer can we hold out? How much further can we run? Holed up in Oaxaca, we'd reached the end of the line. The government was against us. An army waited for us outside. Jesus wasn't nervous. He never was. But neither was I. Holed up in Oaxaca, we'd reached the end of the line.
I love that vid.
That's
I'd like to
amazing.
make a suggestion. I know we haven't introduced Norton yet, who's done the wonderful paintings. Maybe he could paint and Ron could read that Kerouac excerpt. And since I finally got the piano hooked up after 4 months where you can hear it, I can accompany Ron as he reads some Kerouac, and we'll actually end on time. And we'll have everybody in the show. I really want to thank Chloe. She's so busy, and Chloe Trujillo, she came all the way. Merci infiniment pour votre
Thank
travail
you.
fantastique. And
Merci
also
beaucoup.
for the other people, for Pamela Dickerson, who put this whole program and the whole series together, for the great, amazing Anthony Demarbiex, who comes whatever catastrophe looms, he rescues us from the jaws of disaster, for the wonderful James Canary, the keeper of Kerouac Scroll, for Mr. Ron Whitehead, our special guest, who is unique in presenting his picture, his view, his life, and his take on so many important things and helping young people to become teachers and poets and writers and parents and good citizens themselves. To all of you who listen, to our good friend in Ireland who wasn't able to get online the last 3 months, but he's a great, great player, plays a Boran, and unfortunately, Brian unfortunately wasn't able to get on because we didn't have the passwords. For those of you who didn't have the passwords or stuff got changed, I'm sorry, but you can watch it on YouTube. And the main thing is to be creative yourself, because that's what it's all about. If this fosters creativity in you, that's what Jack wanted us to do, to care, respect one another, include anybody and everybody, and realize that we're all artists until we're talked out of it. So this would be, Ron can read that part of Kerouac, which when I accompanied Jack, I used to do that. And for those of you who might be poets or musicians, if you want to do this, you can find somebody working in a dry cleaning store that probably can play their can off, so to speak, and can't get arrested. Get them to come and accompany you and just tell them, listen, when in doubt, leave it out. Less is more, and save your hot licks for your own gig or when you're practicing at home or trying to impress somebody who's breaking into your house. Otherwise, you don't need all that. So we thank you for coming, for supporting, and hope that you'll be creative. And it's a joy to do this series. Next week, we're going to have amazing Chris Felver, who's done documentary films about Lawrence Ferlinghetti, about just about everybody that we know, worked with Native American people, has about 10 books of photographs out, and also has done some extraordinary movies. And in his 60s is still my favorite young photographer because he never lost that spirit. And none of you should lose the spirit either. And Jack's been going since 1969, but his spirit is still here. Sonny Rollins said, man, he said, the body just turns, he's like myself, he's 90 now too, but actually 2 months older. He said, you know, the body turns to dust, he said, but the spirit lasts forever. So Norton, if you can get out the old paintbrushes and maybe get on camera, we're going to end with some of Jack Kerouac's beautiful writings that I used to do with him. And I'm not even sure what Ron's going to do, but since Jack and I never rehearsed in 12 years, I'll just pay attention, and when in doubt, I'll leave it out and recommend you all do the same.
Awesome. And I want to recommend one of Ron's poems, which is amazing. I Pledge Allegiance. It's extraordinary. And one more toast to Lawrence Ferlinghetti, My Country, 'Tis of Thee.
On the roof of America. At night, in this part of the West, the stars, as I had seen them in Wyoming, are as big as Roman candles and as lonely as the Prince of the Dharma, who's lost his ancestral grove and journeys across the spaces between points in the handle of the Big Dipper, trying to find it again. So they slowly willed the night, and then long before actual sunrise, the great red light appeared far over the dun bleak land toward West Kansas, and the birds took up their trill above Denver. I wondered what the spirit of the mountain was thinking, and looked up and saw jack pines in the moon, and saw ghosts of old miners, and wondered about it. In the whole eastern dark wall of the divide this night, there was silence and the whisper of the wind, except in the ravine where we roared. And on the other side of the divide was the great western slope and the big plateau that went to Steamboat Springs and dropped and led you to the eastern Colorado desert and the Utah desert, and then all in darkness now. As we fumed and screamed in our mountain nook, we were on the roof of America, and all we could do was yell, I guess, across the night, eastward over the plains, where somewhere an old man with white hair was probably walking toward us with the word and would arrive any minute.
Merci bien, bonne nuit, et comme on le dit aux États-Unis, soyez tranquille. And as they say in the South, à bientôt.